everybody, welcome to this week's edition of Mr. Greyson's Science Corner. This week is fishing week, and I thought for fishing week, since fishing is kind of hard to do, it's very fun, fish are really cool, they're amazing, but fishing, it's kind of hard for me to talk about fishing on a video. I wanted to give you an experiment that you can do at home that kind of involves fishing, and it might even be a little messy, but it's definitely a lot of fun. So this week, for Fishing Week, we're going to talk about boats. Yes, that's right, boats. Think about all the different kinds of boats that you've seen before. Maybe at the lake or in a pond or even in the ocean. There's big boats like big cruise ships and big oil tankers. There's medium-sized boats like sailboats and rowboats, and even smaller than that, there's canoes and kayaks, and even little tiny pedal swan boats. There's so many different kinds of boats. But how do boats work? Boats work because they weigh less than the water that is around them. A fancy science term for that is buoyancy. Buoyancy is an object's ability to float in water. In order for a boat to float, it has to weigh less than the volume of water. It makes little tiny boats float really well in the ocean and in ponds. That's even what makes giant, huge cruise ships and oil tankers float. Because those big boats are actually hollow. They don't have much stuff inside of them. If you think about a big cruise ship, they're huge, but they're mostly empty space inside. Like where the cabins are. If they're really fancy, maybe there's a pool inside, or big restaurants and big like chambers underneath. A big boat is mostly hollow, so it floats pretty well. And of course we know the water from the ocean or a lake or a pond weighs much more than most boats. So most things are going to float in big bodies of water, like Lake Michigan. You might be wondering, Mr. Greyson, why does a rock sink straight to the bottom of the lake when I throw a rock in it, but a boat floats really well? That's a great question. The same question that a famous Greek scientist thought of as well. A man named Archimedes. When you put a heavy object into water, it pushes the water out of the way for itself. Now, you may have seen something like that if you ever hop inside the bathtub too quickly and all the water splashes out. It's the same idea. The reason this works is when an object is placed in water, there are two forces that act on it. One is the weight of the object, and the other force is an upward force. That's the water, that's the weight of the water, pushing the little object out of the way. If the downward force is less than the upward force, then that object will float. Those two forces are battling against each other. This is why a rock sinks to the bottom of the lake, but a giant cruise ship keeps floating. Rock weighs more than the amount of water that's being pushed up, because a rock is pretty small. A cruise ship weighs less than the amount of water that is being pushed up against the boat. Let me show you what I mean. So as you can see, I filled up a little pie tin full of some water. But if you do this experiment at home, you don't have to use a pie tin. You can use any container, like a Tupperware container, a bowl, a big pool, or your bathtub, whatever works. Just make sure you get permission to use whatever you're going to use for this experiment. The next thing that I have are some quarters. Here's my quarters. I'm going to drop a quarter into the water. Let's see what happens. Ah, it didn't float at all. It went straight to the bottom. Let's do another one, just for good measure. Yep, straight to the bottom. So, they don't weigh much, but they're small, and the amount of force that's being forced up on the water is stronger. A quarter is not very heavy, but the amount of force they're pushing down is stronger than the water that's pushing up on it. So your challenge for this week is to make a boat for some quarters or some heavy objects to float in the water. This is the boat that I made. I just tested it out. That's why it's a little wet. But you can make a boat that looks like this, or you can make a boat whatever way you want. But your challenge is to see how many quarters you can get to float. Let's see how many I can get to float with this boat. Ah, that rhymes. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh! I only got 4 quarters to float. But let's look at the tinfoil. Okay, so I took the quarters off, and just look at that float. It's not sinking at all. It's big enough to just kind of rest nicely on the water. But as soon as I add a little extra weight, it starts to go down. And there it goes. 4 quarters. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning into this week's Mr. Greyson Science Corner. Please tell me about how your boats go this week. I hope they're really cool. Enjoy. I'll see you next week. Bye.